My name's Margo Macdonald. I live on the Key Peninsula. I've been an artist for a long time, but mostly I work in painting, oil painting, and tapestry weaving. I have always been interested in visual art. I loved listening to history, but I never remembered anything unless it was associated with a painting or a sculpture. I started looking at art seriously in high school. I spent a summer at the Banff School of Fine Arts on my way to college, University of Puget Sound, where I took just about every painting and drawing class available until they ran out and my instructor suggested I go to the Rhode Island School of Design. Packed up, went east, spent some time out there, not very long, really got to missing the West Coast and sort of felt like I didn't want to be a painter in a loft in New York anyway. And by the way, I had a boyfriend out here, so I was more motivated to come back here than to stay there. And being somewhat practical, also went back to University of Puget Sound and got a double major so that I could actually do something with my art, and that was to be a teacher. And one of the first things I got interested in was weaving, and part of that was my mother's fault because she gave me a book on backstrap looms when I was probably 20. But then I was hooked and I joined the Tacoma Weavers Guild and started doing all kinds of other weaving, including tapestry. And along the way I was still painting and drawing and that sort of thing. And then I got pregnant with my first child. And all of a sudden, all those supplementary activities, the dye pots, the paint easels, paint on the floor, paint everywhere, had to go by the wayside. And I decided to focus on tapestry because it was the kind of art form that I could get up and leave if I needed to nurse a baby or run some laundry or whatever. There was nothing was going to dry up and wither away if I had to be away for an hour or a day or a week. It's been a great medium for me, and I feel very comfortable in going back and forth between painting and weaving now. I did finally land the perfect art teaching job at Charles Wright when my girls were there, and I taught sixth grade and high school art and introduced mostly painting to the upper school kids. I think my sixth grade class was the most fun because the perspective of a sixth grader is so refreshing that I think I got as much out of working with them as they did with me. Also was a partner in a tapestry weaving business that was in Tacoma, and we didn't do much, but we did 3 large tapestries that are at the Mary Bridge Children's Health Center. So if you have reason to go in there, take a trip over by the elevators on each floor and you'll see my work. I did the middle part of all 3 of those. And working in collaboration was a real fun thing to do. And the 2 gals I worked with are dear friends, and we work very well together. At this point, I mostly weave tapestry when the weather's bad, and I open my windows and paint when the weather's nice. So I'm a sort of a summertime painter and a wintertime weaver. My tapestry weaving for the last 4 or 5 years has been focused on Washington State rivers. The rivers were fun to do because they're all so different. I mean, the waters it's water, but what they run through and how they're treated and what's in them is all different. So I've followed probably 10 or 11 at this point Washington State rivers. We have 3 different paintings here that you can kind of follow my process. This one is on the Deschutes River in Oregon, and it's just sort of roughing in the darks and lights. And it's using a burnt sienna and just kind of getting the basic shapes. This will change over the course of the painting. This piece is a commission item that I'm working on right now, and it's of the Queets River down on the coast. And of course, so you get that gray maritime sky. What really attracted me to this particular image was this great sort of circle of rock here, and the transition of the water being really dark and then moving up to this sort of glacial green and then the reflections of the river along the way, and the way the water's moving. And then this piece kind of shows you how it is finished. You don't see much of the underlying color. You can see it pop up in places, this sort of burnt sienna thing, but it does kind of warm the colors otherwise. And this is the estuary, the Thaler estuary in Belfair. And it's just sort of this wetlands, and every now and then there'll be a beautiful pond. And I love just kind of the depth of it here and the reflection. That's not a perfect reflection because there's water moving in here of the clouds up above. I usually start with an adventure. I'll take my camera with me, and I may have a purpose, like I think probably in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to head up the Hamahama River with my camera. I guess there's a great waterfall up at the top that I'm interested in looking at, and I'll take pictures of the river along the way. And then when I get back, if I have an image I really want to work with, it's probably going to be in tapestry. Generally, I do not start a tapestry from a painting. I usually start directly from whatever source I'm working with. Here's a picture of a piece that I'm just working on now. This is taken over at Silverbow Farm, and I love the reflections in this and the colors and the water. However, there are things in the picture that I do not want to have in my tapestry. So what I do next is to do a full-scale cartoon of the image I want to use. A cartoon is a drawing that's placed behind the warp on the loom as you get ready to weave that acts as a road map. And as you can see here, I dropped the tree out of it and I cropped it in so that I also am missing extraneous elements that I don't really need. This image is a warping board, and although it may be kind of hard to see, you'll see there's a white string that runs back and forth here. A warping board allows you to measure and cut multiple warps at the same time, and also longer warps, because each of these pegs is a yard long, so you can put a fairly long warp on here. And here's the warp on my loom. It's been tied up to the warp beam, which is the top of the loom, and runs through the heddles here and the reed, which separates the threads, and then tied on down here at the cloth beam is what they call that. This is an upright tapestry loom. Once it's tied up, I've got a header that I've woven in here, and you can see that these warps are still tied, are still sort of narrowed together at the knot. So the next job is to pick the warp away from that so that we get everything the same distance apart. And this is my bobbin that I'm using to separate the warps. So this image shows the tapestry ready to be started. The header's in. You can see that everything's evenly spaced, and this shuttle is carrying the weft string through the warps to just secure everything. And here's a close-up. You can see that one of the threads is forward, and then the next thread's behind it, and then the next thread's forward, and the next thread's behind it. And the thing that makes it special for tapestry is that once you start weaving with the wool, you're not going to see these threads. Here's my cartoon placed behind the loom, all lined up, ready to go. Those were the initial yarns that I picked for this piece. That's the beginning of the piece. Here we are at the loom. Here's the cartoon. Here's the original photograph. You can see it's not anything like it. Right now I'm sort of down in this section, working from top to bottom. Sometimes you work side to side, but I almost always work top to bottom. I'll show you first of all a little bit of this extra embroidery thing I'm doing here. All these little grasses are being added on top of the weave. So I'm just kind of going up and down here to add them maybe on. And because it's difficult, unless you're going side to side, to get a real thin vertical line. So that's what I've been doing on that one. To weave the piece, I basically just start anywhere, and generally you don't weave straight across. You want to kind of be weaving in shapes. It's different when I'm weaving water though, because so much of it interacts with each other, so I spend most of my time going back and forth. And I usually use my fingers initially, fingernails, to whack things down. But I do have a beater, which I'll really settle it down with in a minute. Now instead, if I kept going straight up with this black, I'd have a slit that runs here, which I don't want to have. But I will eventually have to do it. But down here, I kind of go back and forth, and it gives it more of a watery look. And I want to have a little arc on this side. There's some grass in here, so I can work this piece more to shape. This is my beater. It's weighted. It was made in Washington State by John Shannock, who's a very famous loom maker. And the weight helps set those weft threads down a little bit more, so you can see that you can't see the warp threads at all. This is my most recent tapestry. It's called Hoe. It's the Hoe River. It's right off the highway north of Claylock. And there's a oxbow. The Hoe River from this point flows down through the Hoe Reservation and ends at the Pacific Ocean in a very sort of quiet manner once you get down there. But this is a fairly lively spot on the river. And the numbers on it are the latitude and longitude of that spot on the river. This piece is called Nisqually at Longmire. And it's really just about a little part of the river as it hits a bunch of rocks. Could be an aerial view of the whole river. What I wanted to get across was sort of these, again, this sort of lively movement high up on the river. This is inside the gates at Rainier. This piece is called Upper Quinault, and the journey that I went on with this was with my husband, and we went all the way up to Graves Creek Campground, which is as far as you can go up the road. So this is a view near the campground. We had to change a flat tire before we did this, so it's quite a memorable day.